Hello everyone, Mario here, and we're walking through this CG armor shot. This is more of a walkthrough than a tutorial because I can't show you how to do everything in one video, but I'll show you as much as I can. Okay, before we even get into anything, if you want to know just like specifically how I matched a 3D person to my cousin here, I would say to just go over to this channel right here, Visual Effects Tutors, because this is exactly where I learned how to do this, because he has Roto Anim for beginners here, and then he has a more complex shot right here where there is someone running towards the camera. If you don't know what Roto Anim is, it's basically like 3D Roto. Yeah, so he also has like other very like helpful camera tracking tutorials, and this is also something that I used in order to get a better track. He uses 3D equalizer, and although I don't have 3D equalizer, I just used the concepts. He has some pretty universal concepts in here. So without this channel, I wouldn't have been able to do this. And if you want to learn specifically that part of that shot, which is a lot of people, I would say just watch this guy's tutorials, because I will not be able to teach it like he does. He's a teacher. I'm not. I don't teach well. So go ahead and go over there and learn from him. Anyways, back to this shot. So I guess we'll go ahead and just get started. Okay, before we even get into any of this, I actually shot this with a Magic Lantern on my Canon Rebel T5i. And then I used this app right here in order to transcode it. So I literally just dragged the MLV files. So it comes with MLV files, and then I just dragged them in here. And the reason I used Magic Lantern is because I knew they would give me raw files, and that's a lot easier for me to convert to ACES. The tone mapping, like I turned off any gamma stuff that was happening. I just changed this to Alexa Log C, and then I put this in the AP1 primaries. For some reason, I didn't choose the AP0. So I rendered it out as a TIFF, and that's why I chose Alexa Log C, so that all of the dynamic range, because there was some values above 1 just a little bit, they would be in here. All right, so then I took that and I brought it into Nuke. I did some more processing on it here, but we're not going to worry about that. Then I have got these lovely plate here, and the first thing I did was to degrain it down here. So all that does is it just gets rid of the grain and the noise in the image. You definitely probably don't see this. Let me try and go zoom in. Yeah, it's very hard to see. Let me actually try one thing real quick. High pass, put this on real quick like this. You might be able to see it better. All right, so there's the grain and without the grain. I didn't used to do this like a long time ago. I would never like care about grain, or I didn't really even know what grain was. But then at my school for visual effects, I learned what it was. And then once I started working, I really learned like how important grain was. I always degrain my plates now. I wish I had neat video, but I don't have it. So I use the regular Nuke degrainer. And that just gets rid of all of the noise and grain, and that way anything that I work on from this point on will be on degrain stuff. It helps with like tracking, so that like when you're tracking something, your tracker's not jumping around because of all the noise and grain. And also for keying, if you try to key like a not degrained plate, it's very hard and it's not very clean. But I guess you can do what you want, so it's up to you. Anyway, after that, one of the first steps I did was, none of this stuff was here, was actually to track. So this is all of my different trackers and stuff, my 2D tracks. I tried a lot of different methods to get a camera track, and that's what a lot of this stuff is. And it took many attempts to get a camera track that works. So there's one here, but that's actually deceiving because I did this track for like, I don't know, a few days, a week. I can't even remember at this point. It was definitely over like 2 or 3 days. If I go ahead and open comp, you can see right here, there's a whole like other script that is just dedicated to solving cameras. And in here is just a bunch of cameras. I think I actually deleted all the ones that didn't work. But at one point there was a bunch of camera solves in here that just didn't work, and they kept failing and kept failing and kept failing. It was very annoying. And then I finally tested something here, which I will show you. So right here it says test crop factor. And what that was is, if you look at the native footage down here, and this might apply to anyone else that's shooting Magic Lantern, you can see that I needed to down-res the footage in my camera settings to 1080 by 612, which is pretty low resolution, but that was the only resolution that my camera would run and not just stop recording. But if you look at the after the lens distortion, you'll see that it's 1920 by 1080. And the reason for that was because no matter what, every time that I try to camera track at this resolution, it just did not work. Every single time, it never worked. I could never get even just one track to work. After I changed it to 1920 by 1080, it started working for some random reason. First reason was because I actually did proper lens undistortion, but the other reason, I tried to do this lens distortion without scaling it down to 1080 and it didn't work. And I really don't know the science behind this or anything like that. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that it should be 1080 footage and it's being cropped after the fact. Like the way that Magic Lantern crops it is probably causing this. The way that I actually got the lens distortion is really just like a little grid. All I did was shoot my computer monitor screen because I was like, oh, I don't have a lens grid. I don't know how I'm going to do this. But then again, visual effects tutors, he literally just shot like his screen, I think, in one of them. And I was like, that is so like brilliant. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So I just went ahead and I shot my screen and then I got lens distortion information from that. So you can see this here, that it is undistorting. All right. Before I continue, you're probably wondering like, why am I showing you all this camera tracking stuff? You want to see everything else. But this was actually a really hard track. Like if you look at this, it looks like there is a lot of information and there is a lot, but the ground is like very flat. There's not a lot of like things to track. It does track some of these, but it starts to lose it at some points as I started to notice. The other thing is that he is like right in front of the camera and keeps getting bigger. So he really like blocks a lot of the major tracking points. And the other thing is like he has a shadow right here, which was really annoying because all this major point right here, it couldn't be tracked because he was like, he just crosses right over this section. That was so irritating to me. And the other part right here is like the fact that this hammer goes in front of like the major tracking points right here. Yeah, it was really annoying. So hopefully this gives you hope that like not every track is just smooth. All right, so yeah, these are the camera tracker settings or whatever. So anyways, all I did was I exported this out with a right geo right here, and I just exported the point cloud, geometry, camera, whatever. And I changed this to Ogawa because before HDF didn't work in Blender. I don't know if it does now, but now it's just a habit. So I changed it to Ogawa and it exported the camera and everything else. Okay, so now we can go ahead and hop over to the Blender side. All right, so now that we're in Blender, I just wanted to show you all of the projects that there are. So like I said, this wasn't straightforward. I bounced a lot like between different projects. You can see like the different stages of the projects as I went along. I didn't just like do everything in one project. You can see like Shadow Pass, Shirt Sim, Strap Sim, texturing, 5 different versions of texturing, and I deleted a lot, mind you. There's a bunch in here that I deleted. I tried to reanimate my cousin. Here's the lineup. Here's Caustics. That's for the breakdown that I did. 3D mats, like hammer paint out. There's a bunch here that I did in different projects. So I don't always try to do everything in one project. I like to break it up. Hand fixes because the hands weren't working in the very beginning. So I guess the first one that we're going to deal with is the lineup. All the lineup is it just means lining up the camera. So this background, I'm not going to go over it. I just did this in Mushroom. So what I did was I imported the motion tracked camera, which you can see here. And I did a lineup on a single frame. So I deleted all the animation off of it because I only cared about one frame. And I guess the frame that I lined it up on was the 55. 55 was the frame that I lined it up on. And the way that I did that is I think it came in like kind of like back here or whatever. Let me go ahead and put the keys on it real quick. Lock rod scale. That way we don't lose where it's at. So what I ended up back here or something like this. And as you can see, the background is just not lining up at all. This is not right at all. So what I did was I brought in the images, the background, for the camera, and I looked through the camera and I went ahead and I tried to match this up. So I would just like move the camera while I was looking through this view and try to get this to line up. So I'm grabbing the camera, I'm hitting like G to grab the camera. I'm not moving the background. I'm moving the camera specifically, just so you know. And I like used landmarks like this where I would move them until they were like in position. So something like that. All right, so that's there. And then I would like rotate from the cursor from this position that I lined up, and I would just double click rotate, and I would be able to like line up the rest of the points back there, as you can see. And right now this isn't lining up super well. It took me a while to line some of these up. But also what I did was like scale. So if I hit S right now, you can see that it's scaling to be like more accurate, basically. All right, so there you go. And then rotated it. And this isn't perfect, but this is like pretty close to what I had it for. So if we go back and forth. And all that does is just by doing that, just the location, rotation, and scale, it puts the camera like pretty accurately at where it should be. And it did take refinements in order to get it like perfectly right. But this like got the camera kind of where it should be. So that's like a little trick that I learned over there from Visual Effects tutors. So I use this like 3D cursor to like scale, rotate, and move in order to get this to line up. So yeah, this was like an important step. And I want to get these right. Like I wanted to get the camera position and the, and you'll see next, the rotomation positions correct, because that's kind of like a big part of making this all fit together. I knew I would be able to do the lighting and materials, but this part I spent a lot of time on. Like I didn't just do this and decide, oh, that looks good. I tested it out, and then I found out it didn't work, and I worked on it again, back and forth, as I was saying. Also, mind you that this is actually correct scale. So I went ahead and I measured this wall to this wall. So if we look at the picture, I measured this like corner right here to this corner down here. That way that I could make sure that this was the correct scale. And that's kind of important for all of this, is that everything is correct scale. That way everything works, and like the focal lengths work, and everything, the movement works, and the motion blur and all that, because at different scales it could lead to problems. But yeah, now that this camera was lined up at frame 55, I went ahead and I just applied the location and rotation to the camera that's actually moving, the actual match moved one. Okay, so now we are in the main scene, I would say, the one with the most things, the one with the like actual shot rendered. Anyway, you can see in this shot everything that's here, and he's actually walking through the scene, as you can see there. So this is the scene where I applied that camera lineup to here on frame 55. So if we go to 55, it'll be the same. Yeah, you can see that the camera is lined up correctly. And this is a decimated version of the mesh, just so I could work with it a little bit better. The other one is right there. So that second step that I did was actually to rotomate my cousin here. So let me turn off everything else, Kitbash, Armblade, all that stuff. Let me turn that off. And now we just have this. Let me turn off the back. There we go. So as you can see here, he's actually walking through the space. So it's not like some kind of like visual trick where he's scaling up or anything like that. It was actually easier to just do it correctly than to try and fake it, surprisingly. So as you can see right here, the arms are like doing something really weird, but it doesn't matter because it's going to get cropped out, and it does get cropped out. So I only focused on whenever he is in frame. So if we look at it here, you can see what I mean. And you can start seeing it match up. All right, so you're probably wondering what like all these like different things are. It took a lot of like constraints and other things to have things to move smoothly and to move well. All of these empties and stuff are just to help better control and add additional animation onto some of these bones, because you can only add one set of animation per bone. but I wanted to have the same animation with a little bit of offset, and so I had to use all kinds of like constraints and whatnot. That's why there's like multiple bones in here. There's like duplicate bones. I don't think you can see them because, oh yeah, see right here, even for the arm, there's duplicates so that I could add like more rotation and whatnot and more offset. And this has like a simple IK rig, and I used Royal Skies tutorials in order for that one, in order to do all the IK on this. But yeah, there's besides all of the constraints like tying things together, and there's not really much going on besides just hand animating everything. So the first thing that I started with is the feet, and you'll hear that over there too from visual effects tutors. Is like the feet, you have like a definitive point of like depth, because a lot of this is going to be like how far away is this person from the camera, and it's hard to tell how far something is away when it's floating like up here, for instance. It just doesn't like, let me just show you real quick. If I put like an object, let's say this ball, put it here like so, like this, parent it here, keep transform like this. All right. So as you can see, let me turn all this stuff off. So as you can see, this ball right here, even though it stays in the same spot and it looks the same, you can see that over here, if you focus on this side, that the ball is like getting closer to camera and farther from camera. Even though it looks the same here, if you look over here, it doesn't change. It's actually like hard to tell the depth from the camera alone. It's like when you see the side, you realize, oh, this is like way wrong. It's way out here. When it comes to depth, the feet are a pretty good indicator of like how far he is, and that's what I did. I used the feet to, let me go ahead and delete these two. Okay, so I used the feet in order to find the depth, and the way I did that is I just would use the cursor and I'd click like that, and it went ahead and it would drop the cursor to where, about where his feet should be, or the tip of his foot, and I would just move this until it matched. So you can see right here, let me go ahead and bring the footage down just a tad. Okay, so now you can see it a little bit better. So I would just drop the cursor and I would move this like to the cursor basically. So I would just move it up until it was at the cursor, and I would adjust, and I would like rotate and whatnot. And I would just go by like every 5 to 8 frames, or like when there was major movements. And I just started like filling in the big motions first. And then after that, I would do the smaller motions and just incrementally get smaller and refine. Because even in my final shot, there's still some like jitter going on, but you want to avoid like anything like jittering too much, like because there's too many keyframes. It's just like with any animation. So although I could have done a better job in the end, it was a point where I had to say, you know what, this is good enough for what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to apply for a match move job. So I was just like, this is going to be good enough. You don't see it here, but I actually tracked one track for right here, just the middle of the hips. And I did that so that I could have like, this is the root bone right here. So if I move this, it moves everything. Like you can see right here, like pretty much everything else moves. So this root bone was attached in a separate like project blend file. It was attached to this one tracker, and it was only attached like to the X and Y from the camera, and I had to animate the Z depth manually. And I did that with like a limit distance here, which is really cool because then you can like edit the depth from camera by using this. It's gonna break everything. Yeah, there we go. So what it does is it looks the same in camera, but you can change how far away from the camera it is, or like how close. You have to choose outside if you want it to go farther. Oh my gosh, it looks like a parachute. Yeah, so that's how I animated the depth. And that is like one of the only trackers I think that I used besides maybe a neck track. But yeah, I did not object track any of this, although I wish I could have. But I wanted to challenge myself just a little bit right here. And was it worth it? Honestly, I don't know. And it didn't even come out perfect or anything. All right, I think that's all that I can really tell you. I'm sorry if I didn't like go into more detail, but it really is that simple. There's not like a secret. I already told you should watch those other videos on it. All right, so now that we went through all of the match move stuff, we're gonna move on to the armor and like how that even came to be. So in the beginning, I kept telling my girlfriend that I wanted armor that looked like a kid built it, kind of like really rugged and rusty and like just like very kitbashy, like just thrown together. As you can see, it did not end up being that. And I try to make a case for it being like some kind of like kid genius that made it out of these like different like parts that he found from the junkyard of like, I don't know, some futuristic junkyard. But really, I just wanted to make it look cool. So it doesn't really make sense story-wise. And you could see some pieces that didn't even make it, like this Iron Man-ish kind of thing. But these pieces too, they just didn't work like animation-wise. So there's a lot here that is gone. I'll get back to these, but the arm blades were a last minute addition. Like, I mean, like the very end. These arm blades, just pretend they didn't exist the entire like process of this video. These arm blades were not a thing. They weren't even going to be like in here. They weren't going to be a part of this armor. So if you look at the floor here, we have a bunch of, this is a free Kitbash kit. I think it was by this person right here, Eugene Apikin, and I think it's 2 people. I'm not sure if I said this name right. I don't remember what the website was, but it was called Hard Surface Kitbash Volume 3, and these were awesome. I like using these pieces for other projects as well. Like they're pretty cool. I use them for the Transformer project that I did too. All right, so because this is the final version Kitbash. But I had other armor like that. He looks like a marshmallow or something. This was like the initial idea to have this like cheap armor. And I actually did a more sophisticated version right here. So this is Junkyard Armor. This will never have a render, see the light of day, but except for in this video. So once this loads, all right, you can see this like, I even textured it, well, not very well, but yeah, this is like the other version that I was gonna have, which was kind of funny. This is more like of what a kid might make, but I just didn't think it looked as cool. And if I was gonna put in this much work, I thought I might as well just make something that like I thought would be like really cool looking in the end. But yeah, this was like the original idea, the more direction that I was trying to go for. I kind of like it now that I'm looking at it. It's very playful. You can also see guns here. So if we look at the floor, let me go ahead and do this. The original idea was to give him a gun on his arm, but then it ended up not working out. So look at all these, like this was the very first arm gun that was supposed to be on his arm, but animation wise, this just did not work at all. Yeah, so these are all the different little gun variations that I made. And there's just other guns that I used to like kit bash them, because I didn't model these. I just like took other kit bashed stuff. I took other guns and I just kit bashed them together. But yeah, this was the very first gun that I made that was supposed to go on his arm on the side. So this was supposed to go, turn it. You're just watching. It's not even a tutorial at this point. It's just like that. So this was the original idea that I was going to have. I mean, it would look better than that. This is not rotated right still. But it didn't work animation wise. And I could not get it to work. And that's why there's so many variations. But in the end, I had to scrap it. And that's why I have the arm blades. But yeah, there's not really much else that I can say about the armor. That's about it. It's just kit bashed. It was just a few days of fun. So, all right. So we're moving on to the next thing. Here's an interesting thing actually, and it's Caustics. So I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to be Caustics, and as you can see here, I actually shined, it's a paint can, I think, onto my cousin here, and to get these lighting effects, it didn't give me exactly the effect I wanted, but I wanted it to look like the armor was on him, which is why I did this. I like to do as much practical as I can. In this case, I mean, I didn't do too much that was practical. That was like the only thing. I think interaction with its environment is what helps like visual effects. And if you can have a lot of practical interactions that make it look like your visual effects is causing it, then it really helps out a lot. So anyway, we are in Lux Core right now. So all I did was I baked out my maps using Simple Bake right here. You can find it on the Blender market, I believe, and it is amazing. I love this tool. There's like easy documentation on how to use it too. It just bakes maps that you cannot bake with regular Blender, and so I went ahead and I bought it. And the great thing about Lux Core is that it renders caustics, so that is like literally the only thing I used it for. I'm gonna go ahead and go to rendered view. All right, so finally, it finally loaded, and you can see right here all of these caustics that are being thrown on the floor, and this is because I have light tracing on, and I actually have it at 100%. So what happens is when you have light tracing at 100%, as you can see, it says it using 100% disables camera rays completely, and you're basically only seeing the caustic light rays. And so I used this in order to get the caustics on the floor, and it's really subtle in the actual shot, but I still think that it adds just a little bit more detail to help the eye believe that there's metal there. So I think it was definitely worth it. And then here's all these other settings. But yeah, this was literally like the one thing I used Lux Core for, and I did want to use it for the actual render, but like my computer's not very good and the render times were just absurd. Like it's supposed to be faster, and it is, I think, but for me, for some reason, like I don't know how to set it up right and all that, and I didn't really want to spend the time on it, so I only used it for the caustics. Plus I know cycles a lot better. Okay, so we are moving on to the lighting section, and my computer is going very, very, very slow. It is not like this at all. I can't even render in cycles because OBS just hates that on my computer specifically. So I have to show you with the EV preview. Okay, so for textures, I actually built these out from different projects. I built these out like in a separate project, but they're pretty like lengthy. So if I open up even just a material, like one of these materials, you can see that they're pretty big. I guess they're not the biggest material chains, but there's a lot going on in them. These are baked right here. So these are like the baked images. That's like everything this way. And then I just added more on top of them. And the way that I made these like textures, I'm pretty sure no one's here because of the textures. They're not like the best. I just did a lot of like procedural kind of stuff, where I just mapped a whole bunch of different images I've taken. All right, so these are like all the images that I took. These are actually from the Transformers project, but then I took a few more to add to this. So these are all like different textures. The only thing I hand painted a little bit was the helmet, and that was just to decide where some of these edge scratches were gonna go. I painted those in by hand, and some of the dirt in here is painted by hand. Anyways, we will get into the lighting instead of the texturing too much. So the lighting is lit with an HDRI. So if I like move around, you can see this HDRI. This is kind of lagging a lot. Yeah, I just shot it with a chrome ball. So here is the chrome ball right here, as you can see. And I just shot like bracketed exposures. So I did have to tweak like the color temperature and the brightness and stuff of the sky in the HDRI, actually a nuke. So the HDRI is here. So here's the chrome ball. And then I did like some color grading on it, specifically like the sky, like you can see the sky specifically is changing. And then a little bit more grading for the color temperature. One thing to note is that you'll see that there is an exposure node here. I downloaded this online somewhere, but this exposure node is like up by like 4.650. And the reason that is because if we go over here and we go down to color management, my exposure is down by like -5. And the reason for that is because I lit this with a sun lamp at, let's go to the sun values. The sun lamp is at 200, and that's a really high number. So like if I bring this back to 0, you're gonna see everything is just completely blown out. But a while back, I actually saw this like article that was explaining how like you should use realistic values for the lights in your scene. Then sometime later, I saw a tutorial from Jonathan Lampel also explained like the same thing as this one article that I had seen. But anyway, yeah, that article was the reason why I started even doing this in the first place. The sun is at 200 because according to that article, that's kind of like in the ballpark of like how strong the sun would actually be and like whatever these blender units were. The HDRI also is like, because this exposure is so high, it's pretty bright as well. If I didn't have this exposure node, I probably would have put the strength up to like 30 or 40. What it's doing is pumping all this light into the scene and it's bouncing around. So because the lights are so strong, it's actually going to look different in your render. If the sun was only at like 1 or something, this would not like bounce around as much as it does. But because it's like so high, it bounced all over this scene right here and just made like really realistic lighting. You could see one more light right here, and that's like a big old area light. Let me go ahead and hide this real quick. This area light is just orange, and what happened was there was like not enough bounce on the side over here. Let me bring back the exposure. All right, there wasn't enough bounce right here on the side. So what this light did is it just went ahead and gave me a little bit more orange bounce. So if I turn that off, it's like really dark on this side. But in real life, this was actually bouncing light a lot. I don't know, but like Cycles just wasn't bouncing enough light. So I added this area light right here to bounce back a lot of the orange light that was missing. So that's why this is here to act as like bounce light. But yeah, the way that I got to -5 was actually, I have the photographer add-on. So if we go ahead and go to the camera and we scroll down, we'll see photographer here, and it's off right now, but in another project, I had actually like set the white balance and I set the exposure based on my actual camera settings. So like right here, you'll see how it says 1/1600, and then f3.5 ISO 100. So these are actually like the settings in my camera when I was recording this. And that's why it's set that way. And because of this, it set my exposure somewhere around -5 point something. I just changed it to -5 here, but in the actual nuke script, it's correct. So what this color management does is like, whenever you render this exposure, if you render to an EXR specifically, won't be applied. I think if you render to any other format though, like JPEG or PNG, it will apply it. All right, and that's just like a more realistic way of handling light when it comes to visual effects, is because you want it to act realistically, using more realistic values to start with will get you there faster, and then you just play with it from there and, you know, add lights as you need. Like this isn't exactly realistic, but it made it look more realistic. So, all right. And another portion of this, in order to get the light to actually bounce, there's some settings that I needed to change a bit. So firstly, let's get rid of this. The light paths, I just choose full global illumination for my final renders. That way this just bounces a whole bunch. But this down here, this was at 10 like this. And, I can't show you because Cycles just will not render for me, no matter how many times I try it with OBS, but it's just too much processing power. But 10 was not enough, and if you try this with your renders, you might notice that like the bounce lighting, it gets clamped. So I usually use 500, and I actually even thought to look at this because of another video from someone named Arvid Schneider. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He works in Maya and Arnold, but I just took like that concept. here, and I was like, oh, he like raised this to somewhere around 500, and I tried it, and it usually works in the scenes to give a good amount of bounce lighting. It's a good starting point, and then you can go up or down as needed. And I know cycles can't render caustics, but this did add just an extra like brightness to the image that I liked, and it didn't really affect my render times. My render times are already bad, so I was like, what the heck, just throw them on. I don't care at this point. That photographer add-on actually also added correct motion blur, which is 0.01, really low, but it does help add. Yeah, right, and there's not really any other settings to go over. The rest are kind of just like basic cycle stuff. And although the lighting setup is simple, I spent a lot of time like getting this right and making sure the sun was correct. And actually, so basically in my CG world, this sunlight is actually hitting this like wall back here, and it overlapped this shadow over here like almost just exactly. And that was important because this shadow needed to be very accurate. Like, yes, I had to match move my cousin here, but the shadow also had to match because the armor being on the shadow needed to be like exactly where the shadow is. Like, it couldn't be behind over there or in front of. And that's the thing, is if this depth was wrong, then the shadow would be wrong. Like, you would have pieces that are like way back here while the foot is actually here, or way up here. So that's why all of this took a lot of tweaking, and even the lighting played quite a big role in making sure that this like matched really well. And I spent a lot of time to make sure that everything was in the right spot, facing the right rotation, having all the correct orientation. All right, so I know it's a little detail, but if you were wondering about the cloth and how I got this to interact, what I did is I actually took these little pieces right here, all these little like X looking pieces. Those are hand animated first. So I ignored the cloth at the very beginning. So right here, you can see like these moving and stuff as if they're like swinging off these cloths, but they're actually not connected to the cloths at all. Like there's no simulation connecting them or anything. These are just like hand animated. So I hand animated each one of these to react to the armor hitting it. So that's why you see like later on in the shot, let's see if I can get it to happen again, up hitting right there, and it causes these two to go up. All I did was hand animate those with bones. All I did was just loop all of this cloth into, oh, there we go. I looped all of this cloth to go inside of all of these objects. I made sure that they weren't colliding at the very beginning. So all of these are like very carefully placed to make sure that they aren't colliding at all. I messed with the cloth settings to get what I wanted, but there is something very interesting here that I was going to make a tutorial on separately, but you know what, maybe not. Maybe I'll just show you here. So with the cloth modifier, what was happening was that these were just flying around everywhere. Like they needed dampening, but the dampening was not working. Like no matter how many times I tried it, it's called drag. That's what it's called. So no matter how many like settings I changed, I tried like so many settings. These like little things were just flying everywhere every time I simmed it. It's probably because it doesn't like these really small, like this scene is really small. Like according to like the dynamics of what Blender likes, like dynamics wise, this scene is way too small, even though it's like to scale. It doesn't like things that are to scale for some reason. It's not just a Blender thing. Maya has this issue too. These were just flying everywhere. Like they just were not staying still. Like right now, these look pretty normal, pretty good. But I couldn't get that to work until I changed the drag settings. So down here, you can see that the drag is actually at 200, which is the limit. So usually it's like a 0 to 1 slider. So usually it's like 0 to 1 down here. But all I did was I typed in like 1,000 or something, and it stopped at 200. And I was like, okay, maybe that'll be enough. It actually wasn't even close to enough. So I went into a different project to experiment with this. And it turns out that if you duplicate the drag force field, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the force field drag down here. So this one. And what this does is it just like slows down your simulation, or it calms it down basically, so it doesn't act as wildly. If you duplicate this, then you get like twice the effect. So if you have 2, it's like twice as strong. Because if you go down here, you can only change this to like 2 at the most. I don't know why it's so annoying. Like 2, like why is that the limit 2? So I couldn't think of another way. And what I had to do, as you're about to find out, I had to duplicate the drag node. And this is how many times I had to duplicate it. Let me go ahead and full screen this. So here's the drag field. I'm going to just scroll down. So yeah, I had to duplicate it 6,395 times for this field to work, the drag field to do like what I wanted it to do. Not even kidding. That's how many times it took. And I don't know why that worked, but it did. And my scene is extremely slow, but it worked. And that was the important thing. And that's all I needed. So yeah, if you need to like drag down your cloth and it's not working, just try duplicating it 6,000 times or something. Don't actually do it 6,000. Try a lower number. Just keep duplicating it until it starts working. It's absurd how high that number is, and it's absurd that there's even a limit on. I don't know why maybe there's like a good reason. Anyway, that's how I dealt with that. There's not really much else to say about the cloth. I just once that was done, I exported it as an alembic. That way I wouldn't have to deal with the sim anymore, and I could use it in the final shot. Okay, so now we're in the Shadow Pass. I'll be quick on this one because I'm sure everyone knows about Shadow Pass. I made sure to exclude my cousin inside of it, so the 3D model of him is not there. It is just the armor. That's because I wanted to keep the real shadow in the plate, but only add to it the armor on top. I went ahead and I smoothed the ground because the shadow looked really bumpy over here without smoothing this ground. So that's why just these areas right here are smooth, because these are the only areas he walks through. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Shadow Pass. And then I just rendered that out, and I'm pretty sure I had an AO pass too. Yep, Ambient Occlusion right there. And that's pretty much it. That's the only job of this project right here specifically was for the shadow. All right, so this is the last thing in 3D. I promise that I will show you. I'm sure you guys are sick of looking at the 3D stuff again. Anyways, I just want to show the arm blades because I feel like someone might ask about this. They're all just hand animated, so there's nothing like super special. Let me go ahead and turn off everything else because this is getting ridiculous. Yeah, so these are just hand animated. They're just like pretty simple. I just did like a simple rig. Also, these are modeled by someone else specifically. These are not kitbashed. If I can find who it is, I'll put it up here on the screen. But these were awesome models. He literally, like, I was on my last leg. Like I just could not think of what kind of weapon to give him because everything I tried just didn't work. It looked ugly and it was really dumb. And I was like, maybe I'll just not give him a weapon. But then I ran across these and it was just like, yeah, arm blades. My girlfriend said, maybe you should add like blades to the arms. So I was like, okay, I'll try it out. And then I found these and it was perfect. Bought them, threw them in, and it was like they were just meant to be together. Oh, it was just the best feeling. So this was the very last minute decision to add these arm blades. And they were perfect. All I did was rig them and then do the animation for them. As you can see here, there's actually kind of a bit of trickery. I think trickery on this one right here. So on this blade right here specifically, it actually scales up. Yeah, right here. You can see it scaling up. This one does not scale up, and that's because it worked for the camera angle where I didn't need to scale it at all. But if you look at this one over here, it's actually scaling. So boom. And the reason for that is because like camera wise, it just wasn't working when it was full length. right here, it was blocking the hand. So I just did a little bit of camera trickery there by scaling this up. I only mention that because you shouldn't feel like you have to do everything 100% realistic, because this whole time I've been talking about realistic measurements and all that. But in this case, I needed to cheat in order to get something to look better, because if I hadn't done that, it would have looked worse artistically. And this also looks believable, and I think that's the big part about this. See, as you can see, it's scaled down. Like, it doesn't even fit in the bracket right here, where this one actually does, because it's not. But yeah, if you need to cheat sometimes, then that's what you have to do. And don't be afraid to do so. And that's where you just like use your eyes and trust your eyes and your artistic ability, because something can be technically right and it just looks wrong. But yeah, that's just something cool, little Easter egg for you guys. All right, guys. So now we are out of 3D land and into 2D. We're back into Nuke, and I know a lot of you actually, I just realized, probably don't have Nuke. But you can download Natron. It's kind of like a little brother of Nuke, and that's a free kind of version. And there's other node-based compositors. You don't just have to use Natron, but yeah, if you want to try to use a node-based compositor like this, there's different options. Even I think Jacob from Inlight started using Fusion, I believe it's called. And they all function very like similarly. They have like their own little things, but every software has its own like little differences. Anyways, I'm just rambling. So let me just show you the script real quick. This script right here, this is all of the work that I did on it. There's no way that I'm going to be able to show you like every single thing that I did, because there's a lot of detail here. And this has the most detail because this is my job mostly, is to composite, not to do any of this 3D stuff. So I'm going to just like break down the major things of what I did. And actually, here's the funny thing. All of this down here, right here, that's the CG. All of this is the CG alone. All of this huge like chunk right here, that's all the paint work. To paint out the hammer, like if I show you real quick, this hammer right here, that was a lot of work to paint out. And as always, I was like, I can paint that hammer out. Like that'll be like the easy part of the shot. And of course, as always, I am proved wrong. And I remember how arduous and how annoying painting stuff out is, how much I want to tear my hair out every time I have to paint something out. It doesn't matter what shot it is or what show or what resources they give. Painting something out is just really just a pain every single time. And so that's why the paint section is this big and the CG section is only that big. So that's just a funny thing. So yeah, I use different techniques to paint out this hammer, and I know you guys aren't here for this, so I'm just going to go over it really, really quickly because this probably isn't really that important to you. But I split up like the different painting stuff, so I didn't paint it all out on one layer. Like I split out like the light pole to be its own thing. So if I go here, if it lets me, you can see that I only focused on painting out this specific area, this light pole over here. And then the house is another one. So like if we scroll back here, let me find a frame somewhere over here, right here. Then this part is called house. And if I just go over here, you can see that the house is painted out now. Yeah, like that. And I just did that for like every single piece that needed it. So like whenever this goes over the wall, I have another one called right back wall back here. So then I just go like that. And now the wall's painted out. I try to be really clean with my paints. So where I have, like I said, I like to have as much of the original footage as possible. You don't have to do this. You can just like throw a big old like card back here in 3D and replace the actual footage. But I love the detail of like, I'm just way too obsessed with keeping as much of the original plate as possible when I can. So that's why I made my life a lot harder than it needed to be. Anyway, I just have a bunch of this work. So I just basically did all of this stuff. The floor was the worst part, and it took like a huge amount of nodes and stuff to get this to work. Yeah, you can see that. Yep, so it's just a bunch of this just over and over again for different parts. The shirt is actually interesting. Basically, I use smart vectors as a foundation. And what that does is it's like a very complex way of tracking like organic material, or material that like that's not rigid, I guess. So like fabrics and such. So what it ended up giving me is I took a still frame and I went ahead and I applied smart vectors to it. So now it like moved along with my cousin here. And if we merge that back on top, it's going to be really slow because smart vectors are really slow. But you can see that it did quite a bit of heavy lifting here. Yeah, so right here you can see that it's tracking pretty well to the original shirt, and it didn't need to be exact because there's armor over this. But this was definitely the way to go, and not just like a straight 2D track, or else it wouldn't deform the way it is here. Of course, the smart vector alone didn't work, so I had to do spline warp on it to get this to work, and other little fixes, more spline warp. Yeah, so it wasn't as straightforward as just doing a smart vector. There was quite a bit going on here. And then I added the flashes, like I said. Yeah, I'll get into that later. Anyway, so that was the whole shirt. And then there's separate parts for the shirt too. And then the shorts as well. And just more and more work. And then I had to roto the foreground on top of everything again. You could see this is my motivational note. Keep rotoscoping, because I was getting tired. So yeah, I had to roto everything back on top after painting it all in. Okay, so CG hands right here. I didn't show you this in Blender, but I actually rendered some CG hands, and this looks wild, but it worked for the few frames that I needed it in. So it's just a projection, an image texture projection. So if I play this real quick, it's a projection onto the mesh that we used to do the roto anim. So if I play this, yeah, you can see that I have CG hands. And the reason that I needed to do this was because I needed to replace the thumb and some of the fingers on the original shot. So if I show you that real quick, we can see the difference here. Go ahead and play this. You can see right here how the thumb gets obscured by the hammer, especially right here. And that was a problem because I didn't want to paint this in for each frame. Sorry, I'm like really loud. I didn't want to paint this in for each frame. So what I did is I did a CG version like this, where you can see the actual thumb. And then when I merged it back on top, let's go ahead and merge our CG hand on top like so. All right, now you can see the difference. Replacing the CG hand with the replacing the real hand with the CG hand, you can see like how this is much more natural looking than if I were to like paint it by hand for each frame. Plus it has its own animation to it. Yep, see like up here, there's no thumb at all, but right here you got this like CG hand going right here. And it allowed me to change the animation a bit because his thumb's not actually coming down right here. It's staying up here, but because it's just a projection now on a mesh, I can make it do whatever I want. Yeah, so that's the reason for that. All right, so that's a fun little thing, a little CG hand there. Yep, and then there's just more paint work, more shadow stuff, grading. Yeah, this is like a lot of paint work, and took a long time. So our shadow actually starts somewhere over here. Let me go ahead and go to a frame where you can actually see the shadow. So we'll go, all right, so this is a good frame, I think. All right, so this is all the shadow section right here. So all this right here is the shadow section, so there's not really too much going on. What I did is I took my shadow pass. So this is the shadow pass right here, as you can see, and it only has the armor, so it doesn't have my cousin, as I said before. I went ahead and I like shuffled this to the alpha channel. Yeah, shuffled the red channel to alpha channel. I reformatted it, added the lens distortion, so now that it matches. So you could see, once it loads. All right, so these are now matching with the correct lens distortion and everything. And then I went ahead and I did the defocus grading, whatever, whatnot. All right, like so. I did add a stencil for the shoes so that the shoes would end up on top. So I just used 3D shoes. That's why this is going to the crypto mat, to some of the mats that I made in another project. So I removed the shoes. This, I'm not really sure. It's removing something else. Oh, this is removing the actual original shadow. So it's keying out the shadow. So if I do this, you can see that it's keying the original shadow, and it's eroded in a bit, but that's for blending reasons. So I'm taking the original shadow and I'm stenciling that out also from this pass. And then here's some more like custom made stencils. And the first thing I did was to add a grade. And as you can see, these merge on top of each other. The way that I got this to work is by taking the gain all the way down and then playing with the offset to match the original shadow, and then a little bit of gamma animation for some of the color variation. But yeah, that's how I got this to match. But as you can see right here, I don't know if you can see it, but let me go ahead and let me just show you something real quick. So as you can see, let me turn up the saturation a lot. These colors are not matching, and I had this problem like throughout where the colors wouldn't match. Like this is pretty purple. And let me go ahead and add a high pass. Maybe you can see this better because I know it's YouTube. No, you definitely can't. Anyways, yeah, you'll just have to trust that this is like really purple right here in this area. And then right here where the real shadow is, because if I turn this off, this is really orange. Like right here is really orange. Right here is really purple, and these were not blending together. And this is everywhere. Like if we go everywhere here, you can see there's like a lot of color variation in the actual real shadow, but in our shadow, it's just not there. The color variation is gone. It's all one color, and that's because of the way Shadow Catcher is. But also, it didn't matter if Blender had like a correct shadow catcher, it still would have this problem. So what I did to fix it was I painted in the shadow colors by hand. So that's what this node is here. All I did was I added brush strokes, and I'm pretty sure that they have a color burn. Yeah, so they have, some of these have different like color modes, like color dodge and color burn or whatever. So if I like turn this off and on, you could see now this is matching. And the reason why I use Roto Paint is because you can paint per frame. Like you can just do like a bunch of paints, change your color up here, paint somewhere else, change your color, and you can do this per frame. So I did this every single frame. I made sure to change what color each part of all the shadow was. Shadow Crease was just a section to like add more darkness to these shadows. Like if I turn this off and on, you can see like before there's not even a crease here anymore, but if I turn this on, the crease is back. Just stuff like that, just to get it to match. So these are just more custom changes. So again, Roto Paint. And yeah, that's like it for the shadow. I am most proud of the shadow actually. Out of all the things in the shot, I think it's definitely the shadow, because that's the one thing I know that came out well and that I did correctly. Everything else was like more of a decision for me to stop working. I was like, you know, it's not perfect, but I gotta stop at some point. You know, I'm not even getting paid for this specifically. I don't care enough to like literally break my body over this and like be like just exhausted. Anyway, that's all the paint work for the shadow, and thankfully it matches because we spent the time in match moving to get this all right, and so I don't have to worry about any problems there. All right, we're entering the home stretch. I'm sorry this video is so long and like rambly, but I'm not a very good teacher. Really sorry about that. So the CG is actually down here. This is the main mat. So as you can see, it is like blown out and stuff because, like I said, it when it rendered out, it doesn't apply the color management to it, specifically the exposure part. So that's where the rest of this stuff down here comes in, the color grading. But first I applied the lens distortion to it. That way it fits in frame, and now it's the correct resolution. And then I had a stencil. So I rendered out a separate matte specifically for Kai. So as you can see here, this is just my cousin, like only my cousin. So I use this as like a complex way to cut out my cousin for the CG armor. So if I go before and after, let's go a little bit later in the shot because it'll be more apparent. You can see that it creates this like complex matte that I can tweak as well. So right now I rendered everything without cutting anything out. But then since I rendered this matte separately, it's cutting out what it needs to using that rotomation that I did. But also because it's separate means that I can make manual tweaks to it, which is what this section is up here. This is the polishing stage where I like manually painted in frame by frame any areas that weren't correctly rotomated or just didn't have any geometry for. So we're just gonna go ahead and skip down here to the color specifically. So first I applied an unpre-multiply. That way I'm not affecting my edges. All right, so here's the exposure to bring it down to the correct exposure. So we can see already that this is looking a lot better, not blown out. I did have AO, but I took it off because it just didn't look right. A little bit of a white balance, just a touch. And then some artistic liberty here. It's just a random grade to gamma it down. And that's all I did there. And fake lighting, what that is it matches this, like how I said I put a tin can. I reflected a tin can on paint can onto my cousin. So I replicated that light onto the armor with just a grade node and a roto. See this roto shape? So, all right, so I took that and then I pre-multiplied it because we had unpre-multiplied it up here. And then I did like the defocus and the edge blur and whatnot just to get a little bit better edges and to match the plate softness a little bit more. And then I merged it over. Now you can see right now that there's already a shadow on my cousin here. And that's because I did some work beforehand right here in this section to do that. So let me go ahead and just turn that off real quick. Let's go down here. And here you can see that the armor is now on my cousin and it's stenciled out correctly. Everything looks fine. So everything is looking good, but obviously it is missing some shadows. So all I did was I rendered out a shadow pass, which is just a shadow catcher, and an ambient occlusion pass, and then I just did the necessary things to them in order to get them to be usable. So like keying them, adding length distortion, and then putting them on top. So here's the shadow pass specifically. So that's what the shadow pass looks like. And then here is the ambient occlusion pass. All right, and these two passes helped give the shadow. I think I could have worked on these shadows because they're not exactly like fully realistic, but at this point, I just wanted to get this thing done. And then here's some manual ambient occlusion for some like manually drawn in shapes for where I wanted more, and the renderer just didn't give me. All right, and here is a toe operation, and all this is doing is it's keeping the black levels in check so that they don't go below a certain point. So if you look at this, the blacks are way too dark. This just lifts them up. This is like a hard limiter. Basically, it just limits them from going past a certain point. All right, we'll skip this because this is the caustic on the floor. But now if we look at this, we can see, let me bring this down. We can see that the shadow adds a lot of realism as far as just connecting the armor to our subject here. As you can see, there's like a huge difference in how well this armor integrates just by this like shadow alone. Because without it, it's just kind of floating, and it honestly doesn't even look, it looks very CG, but with the shadow, it adds quite a bit. Oh yeah, and the last thing right here that I forgot to mention is light wrap. So there is quite a bit of light wrap on this just because there's so much light bouncing around that the light wrap just looked really nice. And you can see it's doing quite a lot down here. It just helps to integrate this into the plate more. So all the bright spots on the plate, they just like blur out and they glow onto like your object. So that's what light wrap does. So let me go ahead and show you this Caustic Pass real quick and show you how subtle it is. So if I turn this on, you can see right here these caustics that are being thrown on the floor and just how subtle they are. And this is the Lux Core Pass that I was talking about. So all I did was just render out only the caustics. And then I just did some tweaking throughout here in order to stencil out the correct things and whatnot. So these are the caustics on top, and you can see that I dialed them down quite a bit because I like to keep things like subtle. So like when I think something looks cool, I'll bring it down just a little bit more when I think it looks real, because I try not to like go too overboard, because I could have easily made this go like really high and it would have been kind of cool, but I think also it would have been like less realistic looking. As you can see here, that's just way too much light for something as dull as this to throw. So I went ahead and I just put it at 0.1, and that seemed like a good balance. All right, so now we'll go to the final parts of this composite. So I can show you just how I like polished it all together. So one thing I like to do with a lot of the CG elements that I have is I go ahead and I make an edge mask. So that's what this edge detect here is. So if I go to this, it's our render, but it's specifically all the edges of the render. So you can see right here that these are all of the edges blurred out. And this is a mask. So what that means is that I can go ahead and do stuff specifically just to the edges. And in this case, what I'm doing is I am blurring the edges in a very specific way. So let's say if we go to the edges here and I turn this off, it's really hard to see, but it's doing like a really subtle amount of blur. And what this does is it's just going to blend your edges just a bit more. In fact, this is like so subtle, I can barely see the difference. Let me go ahead and go over here. But I definitely do this on like all the renders that I do. Right here, you can see it a lot better right here. So what it's doing is it's just, it's doing what cameras sort of do sometimes, where they blend the edges. Like some pixels from the sky right now are now blending into the suit, and some pixels from the suit are blending into the sky. And it just helps like bring these edges together even more. And you can see like this effect happening. Like let's say right here, this is the real shot. Some of this roof is like blending into this house, and some of this house is blending into the roof. That's just like a camera thing. And so that's what I tried to emulate here. You can see how like this sky bleeding into this is just like adding quite a bit of like realism to it, and the skin like bleeding into the armor. And so that's all that does. And the way that I did that is I just converted the color space. So I converted to YCBCR, and that sounds complicated, but it's not. It just means that the red channel, which is Y right here, is the luminance or the value. I can't remember which one. CB is the green channel, which is like the blue difference or something, and CR is like the red difference, and that's in the blue channel. So all I had to do was to say for this blur right here, once it was in this color space, to affect the green and blue, which is the chrominance. That's what it was. I couldn't remember. It's the chrominance. So what that's going to do is only affect the colors. So it's going to blur the color specifically, and only the color. So right here, you can see the colors bleeding into each other. All right. And the second one, I'm going to turn that off, is the red channel only, and that's going to blur specifically the luminosity. So, or the value or whatever it is. I can't remember which one Y is, but it's basically like the luminance of it. So if I hit Y, yeah, luminance, it's the of your image. So that blurs not the color, but like the luminance of it. So all these bright pixels are going to go into this dark area and lighten it up just a bit, as you can see right there. All right, and just a subtle amount, like it's at 1 right here. And the color one you can go a little bit harder on. It's at 4.6, and these are just meant to be very subtle, like nothing too extreme. And these values, like let's say that I had this at 8, then I would bring it down like by half, and that's why it's at 4. So when I first did this, I know it was at 8 because I definitely usually start with 8. So it was like higher like that, and I thought, let me just bring it down by about half. Just for safety. All right, that's just how I blended the edges of the CG. And then down here, got a crop and a toe. So this toe is just making sure that it's making sure that nothing goes too dark in the blacks. So if you can see right here, these are like way too dark right here. Like they're just creating these weird saturations that aren't in the original footage. So what I went ahead and did was add a toe to just bring these up. You don't usually ever want to do that. You don't want to mess with your actual plate in any way. But because it's my shot, I thought, what the heck? I'm not going to go through more trouble trying to solve this issue. And this happened because the shadow is bringing down like the plate quite a bit. So yeah, I just threw a toe on there just to get that to work. And then on top of all this, I added an exponential glow, which is different than a regular glow. It's more of a realistic fall off. You can read more about that on like the digital book that I have on my ASIS videos on the 2 of them. It's Chris Brejan. I can't remember the last name, but he has like the CG cinematography book, and he talks about exponential glows versus regular glows. And this just adds like a much more realistic glow than the like default stock glow. So what this did is it just like added more of like a camera feel. This feels like kind of stagnant in CG, and like this gives it more of like a flaring out like you would see in a real camera, because CG renders don't have like a glow in the render engine, because it happens kind of like in the lens in the camera. So I went ahead and added that there. You can see a Chronos. This is going to take a bit to actually process. This is just adding a bit of motion blur to everything. And the reason I did that is because I recorded this at such a high shutter speed since this was outside, and it just kind of looks unnatural a little bit because of how high the shutter speed is. So I added just a touch of motion blur to everything, just to like soften it up a bit. I'm going to leave it off because it's really like subtle. Like you can see that it's not really doing much except for whenever the pieces move fast. But yeah, it is there, and it's at 0.1. So it's pretty low. I mean, 0.1's not exactly super low, but yeah, it is low. So all right, so we get into my favorite step, actually, believe it or not. And it's not the end of a shot, although that is my favorite step because the shot's over. It's the regraining process. So like I said in the beginning, I degrained my shot, and this is the degrain. You can see the difference. Again, I'll show you between both. So there's the original plate, and there's the degrain. And what this tool does is it brings back your grain in like really cool ways. So if I go here, you can see that all my grain is back. And I know it's kind of hard to see, so let me go ahead and throw a high pass on here because YouTube makes it really hard to see. But check this out. All my grain is back. And now there is grain back on the CG as well. And that's why I love this tool so much, because what it's doing is it's applying the original grain from the original plate in every place that's like unchanged basically. But in all the places where I have CG and the shot has changed, it's adding new grain based on the plate. You can like sample where you want the grain from, and it's just repeating it across the shot. I feel like this step is really cool because then you can like really start to see like how everything integrates, and I just love like grain so much. And this is kind of like a tool that you can make, but the way that this one does it is like really, really nice. All right, if you're not actually working in Nuke and you want to add back any plate grain that you took out, there's actually a simple way to do that. And here is like a very simplified mathematical way that this is actually doing this in. The caveat is that it have to be in 32 bits, 32-bit workspace, which is like Nuke's default. I don't think you can change it. But like in After Effects, if you're in like 8 bits per channel or 16, it won't work. But yeah, this even works in Photoshop. Sometimes I do this. The math that's going on is it's taking the original plate, so the original plate like this, and it's minusing the denoised plate. And the reason why this works, it's just like using simple math, where if you take the original plate and the degrained plate, and you subtract them, then you get a that's like the difference. And the difference is just going to be the grain alone. Like the grain is the difference between the original plate and the degrained plate. So that's what you end up with. You just end up with just the noise. So all you have to do is just subtract your degrained plate from your regular one. And then what you can do is you can go ahead and add it back on top of your degrained plate. So because your degrain is missing grain, you can just go ahead and you can add it back on top of this grain and it will be there. Let me go ahead and high pass this so you can see it better. So you can see this needs to be set to plus because they're being added together. All right, so now our degrained plate is getting grain on top of it. The only problem is if I do this instead. Let me go ahead and show you real quick. All right, so I went ahead and I used this technique that I just built right now. And here's one of the problems is that you can see right here. I don't know if you can see it on YouTube, but the original plate is seeping through. So right here, you can see the edge, like on the armor, you can see the original edge. And the reason why that's happening is just because if we look at our denoise right here, the edge is here. Like it's still going to pick up edges sometimes, and this is just going to depend on how good your denoise is. But yeah, that's going to show up on the render, and that's why I like this DOS grain, because it makes new grain based on your plate grain instead of running into these issues. Especially down here, you can see all this artifacting, and that's just because it's adding the original plate on top without considering that the CG has changed what the footage looks like in these areas. And grain looks differently, like in different like shadow and light. Yeah, so just a whole bunch of math stuff, but that's why I use DOS grain. But you can still do this like in After Effects or anything else. You can do this technique that I just made and just use like masks or something to add separate like custom made grain for the CG elements only. Yeah, so that's it for that. I'm not going to get deeper into that because that's probably not why you're here. All right, so now we reach the end of the composite down here. All I did was render this out. And then now it was like an EXR that I could just grade a little bit just so that it wasn't as dull. And then got my final output down here. And that's basically it for the shot. I think I went over as much as I could. And I know that this was like really long and boring, but I just didn't want to make separate videos. Like if people like have people like be like, oh, you didn't show this one thing. So I just try to compact like all of it into one video. I'm sorry this was so long. I hope that you like took something out of this, and if not, really sorry. But that's kind of the process. It's very like not straightforward. If you have any questions, you can like let me know in the comments, and I'll try and answer them. But yeah, that's like my very convoluted explanation of how to do this shot, which definitely could have been said much better by someone else. Again, I'm not a teacher. I hope I was able to like credit everyone that I like learned different things from. This was a lot of information, but I like to try and make sure that I let people know where I got my information from. So yeah, that's going to be it for me. My voice is tired. It's been a few hours. I've been recording this way too long. I will see you whenever it is that I make another video, which don't know when that'll be. All right, take care. Bye-bye.